Butterflies are animals I've only just started learning about here on this channel. I got my introduction to them last year by tracking down the Pheres Blue, North America's only species to have been driven extinct. Though if you'll remember, the real reason I started looking into butterflies is because I needed a justification for having this poster decorate my set. After having made just one video about one particular butterfly, I think I could maybe justify having one butterfly on display on my set. But a whole poster? I still don't know if I've earned that quite yet. But I like this idea that the Pheres Blue is only the first in a collection of extinct butterflies we explore on this channel. Not only could this produce a really amazing poster of its own, but also if learning the circumstances behind the Pheres' disappearance took us on a fascinating trip through the isolated geography, diverse lepidopterology, and colonial history of the San Francisco area, then I can't help but wonder what more insights we could gain by tracking down and mapping every extinct butterfly species. Alright, to start us off, you might remember that by the end of the previous butterfly video, I actually uncovered a second butterfly known to have disappeared from North America, Cercionis sthenelei, a subspecies of the Great Basin wood nymph that emerged within the San Francisco Peninsula as well. Like their name suggests, these wood nymphs prefer to live in the dry forests scattered across the West, and would have been out of their element in the coastal dune ecosystem found at the very end of this land. Nevertheless, these butterflies persisted here, gradually adapting to these conditions, producing a genetically distinct population in the process. Yet, despite coming from the same environment and having disappeared around the same time as the Pheres Blue, the sthenelei satyr isn't nearly as well known, in large part due to it being relegated to the status of a subspecies. My issue with this is that 90 years ago, the Pheres Blue was also considered only a subspecies of the more common silvery blue. As a result, the rapidly dwindling coastal dune habitat of San Francisco wasn't prioritized for protection, a decision that ultimately allowed for its complete destruction and consequently the Pheres' extinction. It was only decades after this that we were able to analyze its genome to discover it was in fact a distinct species, meaning these lands should have been protected all along. I believe this serves as a clear example of just how blurry the line between butterfly species and subspecies really is, and how treating them differently can actually have real negative impacts on conservation efforts. So for this video and this poster, I'll be trying my best to include both extinct species and subspecies, starting with C.S. sthenelei. And I'm glad I did, as this is what caused me to return to this book, California Butterflies by J.W. Tilden. I used this in the last video to learn more about the Pheres Blue, but I'll be honest, I didn't read it cover to cover. If I had, I would have found this chapter on butterfly distribution, which features a section at the very end titled Disappearing Butterflies. Reading this would have made my job a whole lot easier the first time around, as Tilden touches on both the Pheres Blue and C.S. sthenelei, but he doesn't stop there, as apparently sometime in the 1930s, the Pheres Blue, a subspecies of Boiduval's blue, also went extinct in the area. And I couldn't believe it when I first read this, as it means I completely missed this butterfly in my research the first time around. Which is a little embarrassing, but just goes to show how easily forgotten subspecies are, as Icaricia icarioides inhabits a wide range across western North America, resulting in at least 25 distinct populations. One of these arose on the San Francisco Peninsula alongside the Pheres Blue and sthenelei satyr, where evidently they too adapted to the unique dune ecosystem, evolving into Icaricia icaroides pheres. In terms of appearance, these were notably paler than the rest of the blue family, with a slight orange tint coming in around the edges of its wings. Together, that brings the total unique populations lost from this single isolated peninsula up to 3, serving as a testament to both the richness of the ecosystem that once persisted here, as well as the degree to which this area has since been urbanized. But that's just the beginning, as our man Tilden has included even more examples from the rest of California. Other butterflies considered extinct are Strobheen's parnassian, last recorded in 1958, and the Atossa fritillary, apparently last seen sometime in the 1950s, both also considered subspecies. Alright, let's start with this first one, Parnassius claudius strobeni. These belong to a species that spans the west coast of North America from Alaska all the way down to California. Across this range, at least 9 subspecies have arisen. The southernmost of these were only ever found flying in the Santa Cruz Mountains directly south of the San Francisco Peninsula, and arguably part of the same geologic feature. The important distinction here, however, is that while these 3 all once lived in the same coastal dune ecosystem, Strobheen's parnassian lived in a very different environment, the mighty redwood forests. Here, they were known to fly between just one type of flower that arose alongside the stream beds, known as western bleeding hearts. Although these flowers still occur in the remote valleys of these mountains, Tilden writes how in the case of Strobheen's parnassian, the last thriving colony was nearly wiped out by extensive summer home development. The other butterfly Tilden mentioned was the Atossa fritillary, which was known to fly between the Tejon Mountains and the Tehachapi Mountains of Southern California. Although not secluded on a peninsula, these peaks are tall enough to benefit from the orographic effect and receive far more rainfall than the low-lying surroundings, forming forested mountaintops in an otherwise desert landscape, creating another type of isolated environment. This is no doubt what led the Speyeria population here to evolve apart from its neighbors, though their reliance on these fragile montane forests is also what made them so vulnerable to human activities. To explain their disappearance, Tilden suggests the Atossa fritillary may have suffered from overgrazing or repeated years of drought. Clearly, the various ways humans have altered the landscape of this state has had some seriously negative environmental consequences, and altogether, at least 5 butterfly populations are known to have been lost from California alone, accounting for over 20% of all recognized butterfly extinctions worldwide, making this the epicenter of known butterfly extinction. If you're curious why California, well, that's what I spent a lot of time in the last video explaining. But in short, the area's biological richness paired with its rapid and recent development allowed us to keep track of these species as they disappeared. Though this by no means is the only place where something like this happened. And in fact, we'll find a very similar hotspot for butterfly diversity on North America's east coast within the swamps of Florida. Just like San Francisco, Florida's shape as a peninsula has helped keep populations at the very end of it isolated from their surroundings. To go one step further, the very bottom of Florida stretches into the subtropics, giving rise to a climate and ecosystem unlike the rest of continental North America, only exacerbating the isolation experienced by the inhabitants of this peninsula even more. You could almost say Florida acts like an island, which is probably how it managed to attract a population of the Pargarius zestos, better known as the ZESTOS skipper, a species common throughout the islands of the Bahamas and Lesser Antilles. Then, as southern Florida was being settled, swamps were drained and turned into citrus plantations, a decline in these butterflies was noted almost immediately, but most people failed to see them as truly threatened due to there being other populations elsewhere across the Caribbean. Because of this, its one and only habitat at the bottom of Florida was denied protected status, and development continued. Fast forward a few decades after these had disappeared from Florida entirely, and what do you know, only then was it found that this population had been a distinct subspecies, Epargarius zestos oberon. I hope this once again emphasizes how the complicated genetics of butterflies has led to their disappearance more than once. Now, technically, the Florida ZESTOS skipper is the only butterfly officially declared extinct from this area, but there are 2 more cases that aren't so clear that I still feel I should mention. First is that of the Rockland grass skipper, Hesperii meschii pincayo, another subspecies of skipper native to the South Florida Keys, which actually was declared extinct all the way back in the 1980s, only for one small population to be rediscovered off the coast of Big Pine Key in 1999. While this discovery reignited hope in their cause, this skipper hasn't been spotted since then, leading some to speculate it has finally gone extinct, though it's also possible there may still be some hiding away on one of the Florida Keys, so I don't think I'm going to include this one on this poster just yet. The same goes for Cyclargus thomasi bethune-bakeri, a subspecies of the Thomas blue, better known as the Miami blue. Similar to the Xerces blue, these two once inhabited a rich coastal dune ecosystem, this time around what is modern-day Miami, only for this environment to disappear as the city rapidly developed over the last century. Despite this, a population still managed to hang on until 1992, when Hurricane Andrew slammed into Florida, washing away what was believed to be the last of the Miami blue's habitat. For a time, these two were thought to be extinct, until another small population was also rediscovered in 1999 on one of the islands within the Keys State Park. Which exact island? We don't know, as its location has been kept a secret in order to protect it. While perhaps not extinct yet, both the Rockland skipper and the Miami blue are teetering dangerously close and may need to be added to this poster in upcoming years. But for now, that brings our total up to 6 butterfly populations forever gone from North America, though I'm not quite done talking about the United States, which also extends far into the Pacific Ocean. As you might expect, the Hawaiian Islands are home to an amazing diversity of butterflies as well, many of which live nowhere else on Earth. In a previous video, we learned how these islands are sometimes considered the extinction capital of the planet, so I was actually a little relieved to find only one species known to have disappeared entirely, COLIAS ponteni. The story behind this one is again complex and contested, best summed up by this special issue of Insectivora made after 47 years of investigation, thought, and speculations over a butterfly. In this, Göran Stjolberg tracked down every last known specimen, including 2 that were previously unknown, all of which could be traced back to a single event. During midsummer of 1852, the Swedish frigate Eugenie made a 2-week-long beach anchorage at Honolulu on the island of Oahu. Since that visit, the butterfly has never been found again. Looking for a little more information, we can find this page explaining an undeniable fact is that the only persons who, according to all available literature, say they have seen and collected the species are Samuel Pontin and Johann Kinberg. This collection probably took place a few days after midsummer, when Pontin, together with Master Anderson, made his walk in Honolulu's surroundings to the Nuuanu Valley, and then over the Pali Pass to the plateau on the other side of the island's northeast. However, the collection may have also taken place in other areas around Honolulu, for example along the beaches. We unfortunately do not know. What we do know is that this visit took place just before much of the original lowland rainforest was converted into sugar plantations, likely destroying whatever unique environment existed here to support these butterflies. Though just to give you all some perspective, if we expanded our focus to include all of Lepidoptera, so butterflies and moths, we'd have over 20 extinct species to talk about here. In fact, this is what I originally intended on doing before learning just how many moths have disappeared from Hawaii alone, more than all the butterflies we'll be looking at today. Knowing this, Hawaii's grand total of 1 missing butterfly seems oddly low by comparison, and makes me think this might not be the complete story. Even further west across the Pacific, we'll find another possession of the United States, the Marianas Islands, where even greater losses were suffered. First was EUPLOEA ELEUTHO, a member of the monarch family once known to fly between several of the islands in this archipelago, from Guam up to Rota, Saipan, all the way to Anatahan and Alamagan. Its tremendous size and wide range made this species well known among the people of these islands and earned it the common name the Marianas monarch. They were said to have been common on all of these islands as late as 1936. Not even 10 years later, however, the populations on the southern islands had disappeared completely. Some continued to be found on the 2 smaller, more remote northern islands all the way until the 1970s, but they too eventually vanished, and the Marianas monarch has not been seen since. The story is similar for Vagrans EGESTINA, or the Marianas wandering butterfly. These two were first described in the 1930s based on specimens found flying around Guam, though they haven't been seen here since 1979, causing many to have already written them off as extinct. But then another population was miraculously discovered on the nearby island of Rota in 1995. Initially, this gave their cause some hope too, but considering this finding was a full 30 years ago and haven't been seen since, their fate appears uncertain once more. Lastly, there's NEPTIS guamensis, which was only known from the island of Guam, earning it the name the Guam glider. However, there exists some controversy surrounding this butterfly, as it was only ever found once over a century ago in 1916, and the specimen from this encounter has since been lost. This has caused some to speculate NEPTIS guamensis never existed at all, but rather was a misidentification of NEPTIS hylas, the common sailor, known throughout the Pacific Islands. Of course, without a surviving specimen, it's impossible to say what the truth really is, though I've decided to include them just to be safe. However, I couldn't help but notice there's a suspicious lack of information for all of the missing Marianas butterflies, and I started to wonder why nothing more detailed seems to have been written about any of their disappearances. Specifically, I couldn't find anything explaining the cause behind their loss, though the more I thought about it, the more I started to suspect the time period they all went missing may have something to do with it, as they were all first described by the 1930s, that is to say right before World War II. For 3 years during the war, these islands fell under Japanese occupation, during which it was exploited for any natural resources, including wood from the forests, only for the Americans to eventually launch a successful counter-invasion and take the islands back. These conflicts left the Marianas Islands both ecologically and economically devastated, which only led to further degradation in the war's aftermath as the native Chiromo people tried to rebuild their island home. And if you ask me, the environmental destruction brought on by World War II is the most likely culprit behind the disappearance of these butterflies, as it left a permanent impact on these islands. That brings the total of distinct butterfly populations to have disappeared from United States territory up to 10, nearly half of our entire poster, and I'm sure some of you are wondering why this is the case. Is the US really that terrible, or is there something more complex happening here? Well, if you ask me, it's both. While there's no doubt the US has caused a lot of environmental destruction over its brief history, I think that's only half the story. The other half is that the US is home to more lepidopterologists than anywhere else, and have managed to keep meticulous records of the butterflies that lived here even before these lands were colonized. The sad truth is that countless more butterfly species were likely lost through the development of places like Europe, Africa, India, China, and pretty much everywhere. But most of this happened thousands of years ago before anyone was keeping records of this sort of stuff. The Americas, on the other hand, were largely settled only after the advent of rigorous scientific inquiry, and even the earliest European colonizers to these lands made note of what species they found here, creating a record of what the continent once looked like that would later prove invaluable in tracking every population crash that followed. It's only because we know what was originally here that we've been able to figure out what's since been lost, or at least those are my thoughts on the matter. Though of course, North America wasn't the only place to be settled recently, and a nearly identical pattern of colonization followed by ecological devastation took place across South America as well, explaining the disappearance of the Paraná owl butterfly. The first and only samples of these were taken somewhere along the Brazil side of the Paraná River all the way back in 1919. Though these samples sat unexamined in a museum collection for nearly 100 years, until 2011, when a pair of researchers finally analyzed them and determined they were from a previously unknown species, shortly after they received the description OROBASSOLIS LATUSORIS. While the discovery of a new species might seem like a cause for celebration, to most this was sad news, as not a single other specimen of this butterfly had ever been found, and given how thoroughly settled the Brazilian side of the Paraná River has become in the centuries since it was first caught, this has led many to conclude the Paraná owl butterfly has long been extinct. The only other butterfly known to have disappeared from the Americas comes from the Caribbean, where Battus polydamas, or the gold-rimmed swallowtail, can be found fluttering across many of the islands here, resulting in numerous different subspecies throughout the region. However, there's one island this species is mysteriously absent from, Antigua. And I say mysteriously because although no golden-rimmed swallowtails are known to fly here today, all the way back in 1770, the renowned English entomologist by the name of Drew Drury reported to have encountered one as he explored this island. While Drew was unable to take it as a sample, he did draw this picture of what he'd seen, which more or less perfectly matches specimens of Battus polydamas. Because of this, Drury described his findings as Battus polydamas antiquus, a claim that at the time of making it wasn't all that controversial, as to him he'd simply found a subspecies of a butterfly that was common throughout the region, and no one could really argue with that. However, in the years since then, even after exhaustive efforts to rediscover the Antigua swallowtail, no more have ever been found, causing many, including myself, to question the validity of Drury's discovery. But at the same time, I'm also aware of how thoroughly exploited the islands of the Caribbean were following colonization, and find it more than possible for Antigua to have lost species before any record was ever made of them. If that's the case, then this drawing by Drury may in fact be a priceless artifact, our first and final glimpse of an animal on the verge of extinction, and because of this, I've decided to include them on this poster as well. But alright, that's everything I was able to find lost from the Americas, so it's time to move on to another hotspot, this one in the Indian Ocean. While they might not seem all that similar to the Americas, many of the islands here, such as the Seychelles, Mauritius, and Rodriguez, were completely uninhabited prior to European discovery, preserving what natural wonders were contained within. This once again provided European naturalists with the rare opportunity to explore a pristine environment and collect samples of the animals that lived here before their habitat became colonized by sugar plantations, allowing them to keep track of what's been lost since then. In the Seychelles, for example, EUPLOEA rogeri, or Roger's monarch, is known from a single specimen collected back in 1820. Unfortunately, this specimen has also been lost, and now all that remains of it are two paintings made of it from 1837. Naturally, this has caused many to question the legitimacy of this species, which papers like this, titled EUPLOEA rogeri, a little-known Seychelles butterfly, have tried to solve. By the end of this paper, 5 different possibilities are given. Firstly, it could be an aberration of E. mitra. Secondly, it may represent a distinct EUPLOEA species now extinct. Thirdly, it could represent an extinct nymphaline species and is not a EUPLOEA species. Fourthly, E. rogeri could be an extinct subspecies of some other Indo-Australian EUPLOEA species. Finally, E. rogeri could be an extinct Seychelles subspecies of E. euphon. Clearly, there's still some confusion surrounding Roger's monarch, but considering most of these options involve some kind of distinct population going extinct, I believe it's worth including on this poster, even if, unfortunately, without the actual E. rogeri specimen, the truth may never be known. Though that's not the only butterfly missing from the Seychelles, as Phalanta filberti, or Filbert's leopard butterfly, were once found on 3 different islands within this archipelago, Mahé, Praslin, and Silhouette, as early as 1893. However, the last time one was collected was in 1953. Technically, there were reported sightings stretching into the 60s, but even those have ceased, and the consensus now is that they've gone extinct. The nearby island of Mauritius is another place I've previously gone into depth on this channel, as it was here where dodos once lived, only to be driven extinct by Dutch settlers, so it's not really a surprise that this island has lost a butterfly species as well, LIBYTHEA CINYRAS, or the Mauritius snout. Very little is known about this butterfly, as these two were only ever collected once from the Mocha district of Mauritius all the way back in 1865. Without a single sighting since then, it's assumed these two went the way of the dodo. Beyond Mauritius lies the island of Rodriguez, where another monarch species, EUPLOEA DESJARDENSII, was once found. Again, these were only ever recorded one time in 1844, and as such, there's not really much else to say about them, except that some sources had them down as a subspecies of EUPLOEA euphon, but either way, they haven't been seen in nearly 200 years. Trust me, I get that it's a little tenuous to include so many species that have only ever been known from a single specimen, but we also have to remember that these islands were settled so rapidly during a time when science was still very much a new thing that we're lucky to have any record of what wildlife was here at all, and so I've decided they're all worth including on something like this. Beyond these Indian Ocean islands, there are at least 2 more hotspots where more than one butterfly disappearance has been recorded, and the next one I want to look at is in Europe. As I said earlier, most extinctions here likely took place thousands of years ago when these lands were first being settled, so we most likely have an incomplete record of the area's butterflies. But Europe is also where scientific, or should I say taxonomic, record keeping first really took off, and so there's also no place on Earth with a longer, more extensive record of the species present than here. This is what has enabled us to notice a handful of subspecies that haven't been seen in quite some time. One of the most common species on this continent is Lycaena dispar, otherwise known as the large copper, which has a range spanning from England to Manchuria and includes at least 7 subspecies. One of these, L. dispar, was only known from the swamps on the southern end of Great Britain. But you know how the story goes by this point. Every last one of these swamps was drained long ago to make way for intensive agricultural usage, and pretty soon after, the large copper disappeared from this island completely. Once again, it appears Great Britain's geographic isolation made the species or subspecies native here more vulnerable than mainland populations, which continue to persist despite similar degrees of environmental disturbance. In fact, in the time since the large copper disappeared, relatives of this butterfly have been reintroduced to the island from the rest of Europe, and now L. dispar flies here once again, though the unique population that was once here is still gone forever. On mainland Europe, we'll find a familiar story with the Dutch alcon blue. Just like the Pheres blue, members of this subspecies inhabited just 2 small coastal dune ecosystems within the Netherlands. But as humans continued to encroach on their spaces, eventually this population disappeared, and the Dutch alcon was last spotted in 1979. A similar thing happened to the Danish clouded Apollo, Parnassius, Apollo, and ANCILE, which were found only at the very end of the Jutland Peninsula, isolating them from all other clouded Apollos on the continent. This again bred diversification that resulted in a distinct subspecies. Unfortunately for them, this peninsula would eventually become Denmark, one of the most densely populated places in all of Europe, leading to their eventual disappearance as well. However, during my research for the clouded Apollo, I fell down the rabbit hole of other rare Apollo subspecies, such as P. apollogadorensis, only known from the Sierra de Gador Mountains in Spain, or P. apollophilippicus, from the Sierra de los Filabres, also in Spain, that are sometimes considered extinct as well. But then I found references to even more lost clouded Apollo subspecies, such as P. apollo ruthinicus, P. apollocumenensis, P. apollo marcianus, P. apollo isacarus, P. apollo cominius, P. apollo eubohemicus, P. apollo silicinius, P. apollo friburgensis, P. apollo posthumus, P. apollo hoglandicus, P. apollo albus, P. apollo mendelosus, P. apollo corellius, P. apollo serpenticus, and so on. If all these subspecies really are extinct, well, that's horrible, though it would help support my idea that there are many more extinct butterflies from places like Europe that we simply don't know of. However, because I couldn't really find anything confirming that these subspecies are extinct or even real, I decided to include just one clouded Apollo on this poster. Beyond Europe, there's only one other hotspot for butterfly extinction, and that's in the south of Africa. With a similar Mediterranean climate as California and an even more diverse selection of flowering plants, it should come as no surprise that this is another land rich with butterflies. It was here that in 1863, an English naturalist by the name of Colonel James Henry Bowker took 3 samples of a butterfly he kept finding while exploring the Embache River. Having never seen it before, Bowker described it as a new species, Deloneura immaculata, the Embache river buff, and carried on with his expedition. Despite his original ease in finding this butterfly, no one has found them since, though at least the specimens he took still survive, assuring us they really did exist. As to why they disappeared, it's hard to say, but based on everything we've learned so far, I'm willing to guess the rapid colonization and exploitation of these lands at the hands of European settlers might have had something to do with it. 7 years later, a very similar thing happened to a man named Walter Morant, who was exploring the nearby KwaZulu-Natal region where he found a blue butterfly he'd never seen before, one with orange spots at the base of its wings and a small black streak through their middle. Morant took 2 samples of this blue, both of which remain in the Natural History Museum of London to this day. To make matters more confusing, in 1879, another sample of Morant's blue was found nearly 200 miles away, outside of the town of Potchefstroom, confirming this was a real species, Lepidochrysopsis hippopalea, though no more have been found since then, earning it a place on this poster. And alright, that's every major hotspot for extinction I was able to locate, though there are 2 more butterflies that didn't really fit in with the rest. Staying in Africa, Graphium aurevelusi was a large black and white swallowtail known from the center of the continent. Unfortunately, very little else is known about it, as it too was only ever found once, and even worse, no one actually knows where exactly it was found. Literally the only source of information on this butterfly comes from a publication in the Annales de la Société entomologique de Belgique, published in 1896. On page 499, we'll read about Lepidopterus nouveau de Congo, and the very first one reported is Papilio aurevelusi. If you couldn't tell, this is all in French, but if we translate it, we'll find most of this is a straightforward description of the animal in question. Only at the very end does the author say this: "It is regrettable that I cannot indicate precisely the place where this insect coming from Central Africa was captured. It was part of a batch of insects that I acquired and which were brought from the Congo." And I think this is kind of interesting, how explorers would collect pretty much everything they could get their hands on and just sent it all back to Europe to be studied. Unfortunately, this means we'll likely never know the exact location these butterflies came from, or what has happened to them since, leaving them to this day as one of the most mysterious butterflies ever described. And with that, there's one final lost butterfly for us to learn about. I left this one for last because it doesn't really follow the same narrative as the rest of these, and to find it, we need to look deep into the jungles of Papua New Guinea. Being the largest tropical island on the planet, this land is home to an amazing diversity of all animals, including butterflies, one of the most spectacular of which being Ornithoptera paradisea, or the paradise birdwing. And thanks to the richness of these Papuan rainforests, at least 7 subspecies are known to have arisen on this one island. The very first specimens to be collected were from this corner of Papua, the Huon Peninsula, in 1893. An isolated habitat within an already isolated land, and as such were described as Ornithoptera paradisea, the nominate subspecies, or in English what's considered the most typical form of a species. However, the paradise birdwing has since disappeared entirely from the Huon Peninsula, leading many to consider this subspecies extinct. What I find so strange about this, however, is that an up-close look reveals the Huon Peninsula remains rather well preserved. I mean, sure, there's clearly been some human development here, but nowhere near on the scale of what we've seen in the Americas or elsewhere, and there appears to still be large tracts of pristine forest. Now, I'm no expert, but if you ask me, it feels like the lack of sightings of this subspecies may have something to do with the incredibly dense jungle these butterflies inhabited, making it near impossible to conduct a truly thorough search of these lands. This suspicion was only made stronger after failing to find an agreed upon cause behind their disappearance. I mean, some sources do point towards the expansion of coffee plantations in the area as a potential culprit, but if you ask me, the greatest threat to the paradise birdwing may be their own popularity, as their size and stunning color has made them the centerpiece for many collections, both public and private. From the moment the first specimens arrived back in Europe, people have been fascinated with these great golden green butterflies, though the more that were taken, the rarer they became, which only drove their perceived value up even higher, leading to even more collecting, starting a vicious cycle that only ends when every last butterfly has been pinned, pressed, and mounted for display. Though considering other subspecies persist across the rest of the island in much easier to access areas, I have a hard time believing this alone could have completely eradicated every last member of this community. All this makes me hopeful that the paradise birdwing may still be fluttering between the tangled branches of this jungle and may one day be rediscovered, but until that happens, I'm going to include it on this poster as well, if for nothing else than to help raise awareness for these amazing but threatened creatures. And that's really my whole purpose in making this poster, as by now I think it's clear many of these have not only been lost but nearly forgotten as well. Case in point, at the time of making this video, only 13 of the 23 butterflies I've mentioned today can even be found on Wikipedia, the others being either too questionable or too obscure to make the cut. And I'm not just patting myself on the back for all the research I did for this, but I really think this demonstrates how easily these species can disappear not only from this earth but from our collective memories as well. That's why I went the extra mile and hired a fantastic artist, Kareem Nahabu, who specializes in insects, to meticulously hand draw all 23 butterflies mentioned today, so that by the end of this video, not only will I have a scientifically accurate rendering of each of these, but also a stunning poster to go along with it. One I'm thrilled to announce is now available as my very first piece of Atlas Pro merch. It's my hope that by making this video and this poster, I can prevent these from being forgotten for just a little longer and maybe even help inspire people to continue searching for them. I know this all got started because I wanted to justify having that poster up behind me, but if you ask me now, this one is so much better. Not only is it equally a pleasure to look at, but there's real meaning behind this as well. While the artist who made this may as well have thrown together a bunch of random, unrelated butterflies and moths that look nice enough next to each other, every piece of this poster has its own story, its own reason for being here, and all together they help tell an even bigger story, one of our impact on this planet. For me, this is where art and science intersect, and I couldn't be happier with the result, as there's just something so profoundly moving about seeing all these beautiful species in one place together, only to learn the tragic reason why. I also appreciate how this isn't your typical YouTuber merch. It's not a t-shirt or a mug with a logo lazily slapped on it. It's a real work of art, or 23 works of art really, that even someone who's never heard of this channel could still appreciate. Trust me, put this up in your home, office, classroom, dorm, or wherever, and I guarantee the next person to see it will ask you about it, and you'll get to look really smart when you're able to tell them the stories behind each one. If you couldn't tell, I'm genuinely so proud of these, and if they do well, that opens the door for me to make more like it in the future. You may also have noticed that I don't do sponsorships on this channel anymore, and the only way I can feasibly do that is by branching out into other projects like this. So if you enjoyed this video and would like to help preserve the memory of these amazing creatures, all while helping to support this channel in the process, please check out the link on screen or in the description that'll take you over to my store. I'll only be printing a limited number of these based on how many of you actually click that link, so if you want to make sure you don't miss out, don't wait up. I know it's taken me a while to come up with merch for this channel, but that's only because I value and appreciate every one of you still watching and wanted to create a product I truly believed you will all connect with and enjoy. So once again, the link on screen will take you over to my store where you can pick up one of these posters for yourself. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.
When this day arrives, the insect jerks violently for a few moments, and then the chrysalis pops open, and from it emerges an adult insect, the butterfly. And so the caterpillar pays his debt to society. He was an awful nuisance in that garden. But as a butterfly, he not only adorns the world with his beauty, but performs the vital function of carrying pollen from flower to flower.